Prior to the discovery of bacteria, how did people explain fermentation of bread, wine, beer, pickles, etc.? This has been posted before in Ask History, but there wasn't any responses. Louis Pasteur's germ theory came out in the 1860s. By then people were well in control of fermentation processes and were able to create distinct flavors without even knowing bacteria existed. What was their logic, reasoning behind their methods? For example, if we mix a batch of bread dough too warm, we know the dough will ferment quickly because bacteria are more active in warmer environments. If a baker mixed dough too warm in 1820, what did he think was happening?
In beer making, spontaneous fermentation was used a lot. It was understood that if you put the dregs of the previous batch of beer into the wort, you would get fermentation to happen more quickly, and there wasn't an explanation for it, just general rules on how to control the process.
Lots of people had lots of explanations, some of them close to correct, some of them nowhere near correct. And all of them were certain they were right. Sort of like today.
Pretty much this. You don't need to understand that the Earth actually rotates in space to know that the sun rises every day. It's a repeatable process.
I know a little bit about this oddly because of studying the lore of we only need an explanation for fermentation via microbes because we assume everything is lifeless until proven otherwise, but ancient peoples didn't assume this. The way they understood the world assumed that everything was alive and imbued with spirit until proven otherwise, and the spontaneous fermentation or decay of foods appeared to them to be the evidence of Swiss alchemist Paracelsus, Philippus Aureolus Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim, who lived in the Renaissance period, didn't think of fermentation as being carried out by organisms that were alive, but thought of living things as carrying out fermentation in their various organs. Digestion, the bodily functions, etc. were thought of as your organs all doing some kind of fermentation. Fermentation and distillation were cutting-edge technology in those days, and just as analogies are made between our brains and computers nowadays, in his day, analogies were made between various human organs and bodily processes and fermentation. With regards to some aspects of digestion, this wasn't too far off, since our guts have an entire microbiome that coexists with us. Our gut microbiome literally ferments the fiber in our food to provide us with certain beneficial compounds like butyric acid and propionic acid, while others make us gassy, and make us out gases produced during their fermentation. It's not hard to see where the inspiration for this concept came. Added asterisk. For example, pregnancy was thought to be a fermentation process where the mother's fermented the of the father, thereby converting it into a baby. Added asterisk. As far as I understand of his concept of what was going on, fermentation was a natural transmutation of substances. Gases were produced from wet solids, and sugar was turned into alcohol, or in the case of lactic acid fermentation, sugars were turned into acids. All of this was mediated by a living substance, though they didn't necessarily understand the mechanism, nor that there were individual cells of yeast or bacteria doing the work, or even mold in mold. Fermented meats and cheeses such as salami or the substances that did the fermenting inherited something from their ancestors, and separate cultures could thus be preserved in order to propagate fermentation with the qualities that they exhibited. In the human sense of the term, culture is what we inherit from our society that shapes how we do things and what sorts of things we do. This same term got applied to fermenting substances such as leaven because each lineage of yeast or starter dough or whatever continues to do what its ancestors did, each with its own cultural characteristics, which we perceive as the flavors characteristic of each lineage of wine or beer yeast, or yogurt or cheese culture, or sourdough. The same way, our term spirits, in reference to alcohol, comes from this period's view of fermentation. When you ferment, the foaming bubbling ferment was referred to as the body of the ferment. When you boiled it, you killed the body, which would not ferment after being removed from boil, and was thus dead, and the vapors that came off of the boil were thought of as the spirit of the ferment as it departed the dead body. This spirit was what they believed they were condensing when they distilled alcoholic ferments into hard liquor. This is why the term used to refer to distilled alcohols is spirits. This is also why concentrated alcohol was referred to as aqua, the water of life, because it was believed the life of the ferment was captured in the distillate. And each type of thing you ferment had its own character, its spirit, ether, which was thought to be the essence of the thing, just as a person's spirit was a sort of essence of the person. It was thought that this spirit, ether of an animal or person or substance or thing was the fifth element, after the other four classical elements that were thought to compose all things: air, water, earth, and fire. That is why we have the term quintessence, coined by the French alchemist Jean de Roquetelade. Quint means five, and essence means element. The quintessence of something was that thing that gave the substances of a thing its essential character, the spirit of that thing. In alchemical lore, this was conflated with highly concentrated alcohol produced by repeated distillations. The alchemical way to capture quintessence is to do 7 sequential distillations, usually of an alcoholic ferment, after which you would supposedly have the purest of the pure essence of the thing you're extracting. To this day, when you distill out the fragrances of plants, these distillates are referred to as essential oils, meaning the oils that contain the essence of a plant, its characteristic worldview that the world was full of interconnected life, and was imbued with spirit. Even to substances like leaven and fermenting dough, is called anima, living world, world soul, and it informed the various ancient worldviews of the pre-scientific era. And even today, you might be surprised at how many people operate with this worldview. In Japan, a lot of people seem to operate under the anima mundi worldview as part of the culture. For example, Marie Kondo thanking things for their service to pay respect before getting rid of them because they no longer spark joy when she tidies up the home of one of her clients is an example of viewing all things as alive and imbued with spirit, and therefore deserving of conceit. That yeast was recognized as a substance that grew and spread even in the way it is spoken of in the Bible, for example, Matthew chapter 13 verse 33, 1 Corinthians chapter 5 verses 6 to 8, Galatians. But as far as I can discern, at least in Europe, where alchemy dominated the proto-scientific natural philosophy of the day, had it that these substances carried out the processes of life, and were in some way alive, and even had spirits in them.
Really interesting and well thought out reply. Thank you, smiley face.
Feels like most things throughout history were invented in this experimental way and just taken as a it works don't touch. 100 years later, a maniac genius has a weird idea and it happens to check out. Then we finally know how said thing, the late 20th century, most of the low-hanging fruit had been picked though.
Alcohol itself has a funny etymology relating to this. Paracelsus used the word alcohol to refer to any fine substance or volatile liquid, assumedly in reference to al, and by the 17th century it was essentially synonymous with spirit, in the sense that you gave it. Naturally, alcohol of wine, and similar just ended up becoming alcohol over time, much like spirits got genericized to that.
What a wonderful bit of history. Absolutely stealing this for my D&D game.
Here's another tidbit you may be able to make use of in your game. An excerpt from a primer on I wrote a number of years. Is your game about alchemy, or fermentation, or something else? ____ how fermentation preserves food. ******* One form of filth kills another form of filth. ****** Fermentation is best described as human intervention into a three-way microbial war for the purpose of preserving food and enhancing *its flavor. These are the three major combatants in this microbial war. Yeast which produce alcohol that kills bacteria, and molds bacteria which produce acids that molds, and yeast molds which produce digestive enzymes and antibiotics that yeast and bacteria. These three battle for supremacy over who gets to take over our food, and in the course of doing so, produce substances which fend off the colonization and growth of the others, particularly the decomposers. This microbial chemical warfare is memorably summarized by the observation that one form of filth kills another form of filth. What we do when we ferment is to make alliances with the microbe of our choice by creating conditions favorable to that particular kind of microbe so that they can take over our food, in exchange for letting them utilize some of the calories in the Food, we utilize their natural defenses to ward off unwanted microbes that would decompose the food or cause food some forms of fermentation, such as kombucha, fermented tea. We ally ourselves with two classes of microbes at the same time, bacteria and yeast. In others, such as sake, Japanese rice, wine, we switch sides midway through. In sake, mold is used to break down rice starch into fermentable sugars. Then, the alliance with mold is broken as the moldy rice is mashed up to break up the mold structures. The mash subsequently liquefied and fermented with yeast, which convert the sugars into alcohol. For vinegar, yet another stage of fermentation is carried out where acetobacter bacteria are employed to convert alcohol, in low enough concentration that it won't bacteria, into acetic acid. In the case of rice wine vinegar, all three of the microbes are employed one after another. Many cured meats such as salami and cheeses such as brie are cured with penicillium mold, which colonize their outer surfaces and prevent the infiltration of harmful bacteria. Miso, fermented soybean paste, is fermented with koji mold and preserved with salt. Sour cream and yogurt are fermented with various kinds of lactic acid bacteria and get their characteristic sourness from lactic acid and other flavorful acids.